Welcome back to Face the Nation. The global summit is underway right now in Glasgow, Scotland. It is the world's latest effort to tackle the fact that the planet is getting hotter. But expectations for substantive agreements to do something about it are pretty low. The UN Secretary General says there's serious risk that world leaders will not deliver, urging more ambition and further action. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Mark Phillips is there.
There is a cloud of gloom hanging over this conference in Glasgow, and it's not just the weather. To understand the pessimism, it helps to go back to those heady, optimistic days in France 6 years ago when the Paris Climate Accords were signed. The warming of the planet would be kept below 2 degrees Celsius, it was agreed. Preferably, it wouldn't exceed 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The problem with Paris, though, was that it was a conference about aspiration, not practicalities. How each country would reduce its own greenhouse gases was left to later. Well, later is now, and not nearly enough has been done.
It's all happening faster than you even feared.
It's all happening faster than we ever thought. In fact, it's happening faster than scientists thought.
Christiana Figueres was the UN official who knocked heads together and made the Paris Accords happen.
Well, anything above 1.5 is bigger trouble than we thought.
Well, absolutely. It's much bigger trouble. It causes 2 to 3 times as much biodiversity loss, 2 to 3 times as much infrastructure loss, and 2 or 3 times as much human misery.
The misery has been all around us lately. Floods in Europe, sweltering heat domes in North America. The world has changed since Paris, particularly in the relationship between its 2 biggest polluters, the United States and China.
Contrasting to where we were in the relationship between the United States and China in 2015, the 2 of them walked in literally hand in hand because over the previous years they had realized that they were better off collaborating on climate change than confronting each other. That has not been the case this year for all the reasons that we know.
Not only will Chinese President Xi Jinping not be coming, neither will Russia's Vladimir Putin. If there's any cause for hope in Glasgow, it's that companies, if not governments, have begun to see the value in going green. Mark Carney, who headed the central banks of 2 G7 countries, has been twisting arms.
You know, at present, there are leaders and laggards in the financial sector, leaders and laggards amongst companies. People will be able to tell who's leading and who's behind, who's on the right and the wrong side of climate history.
They've set up this conference to show how the future of the planet is at stake. But what are its chances of success? British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has likened it to a game where humanity is losing to climate change 5-1 at halftime. And Margaret, there seems little chance of a second-half comeback.
Mark Phillips, thank you. We go now to Congressman John Curtis of Utah, a Republican who is scheduled to travel this week to Glasgow to attend that climate summit. Congressman, thank you for joining us ahead of your trip.
Good morning, Margaret.
I want to tackle some business here at home first. The House is expected to vote, as you heard, this coming week on that $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan. This is roads and bridges. It's popular. Why are you opposing it?
Well, this thing has been botched from the beginning. You know, this was negotiated in good faith in the Senate, and I have no doubt had it come straight to the House, it would have passed with strong Republican support. But the reality of it is, we were told from the very beginning that this was coupled with the reconciliation spending, which is a no-go for Republicans.
Right, but so what I hear you saying, though, is that it's about like optics, that it's about politics. You would have $3.6 billion for your state come in here as a result of this bill. Aren't you just making a political point? I mean, isn't that what people hate about Washington?
So listen, my state is more worried about debt than handouts from the federal government. Sure, there's some good things in that bipartisan infrastructure bill, but the reality of it is that's not the vote. They've been very clear. If the bipartisan infrastructure package passes, so does the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. Now, it may not be $3.5 trillion anymore, but I'll tell you, on foremost in Utah's mind is debt.
So you expect Republicans to try to stand in the way of this?
It's not us standing in the way. Listen, Republicans have no control. You can't imagine how frustrating it is to be a Republican in the House right now. This is all in the Democrats' hand, and I don't even know if we're going to have a vote on it. Like we were told last week we would vote. We were told 2 weeks before we would vote. So who knows where this is going to land?
Let's ask you now about climate, which, as we introduce you, you are going to that Glasgow summit. You're also one of the founders of this conservative climate caucus. That is something that will surprise people. They often hear climate change and hear very partisan points of view here. You as a Republican are trying to make a statement. Specifically, what is your message on what needs to be a viable energy source for the United States?
Yeah, the message is very clear. First of all, the message is that Republicans do care. We've been subject to a branding problem, and we need to overcome that. But loud and clear, Republicans care.
You think it's just a branding problem?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I'm here from the state of Utah, and I guarantee you there are more Republicans here than most places, and I know deep down everybody cares about this planet. We want to do what's best for it. We want to leave it off better for our children. Now, it's fair to say we're turned off by the extremist rhetoric, and we don't always agree on the way to get there. But I can promise you Republicans do care deeply. And let me just show you, this caucus is a great example.
I want to ask you about something specifically you spent a lot of time on, which you, in interviews I've read, talk about nuclear energy as an alternative to fossil fuels. Do your constituents really want nuclear plants in their backyard?
Listen, a lot of times when we think about nuclear, we think about our grandparents' nuclear, and we need to change our paradigm on that. Listen, U.S. innovation and technology can lead us past the concerns that we have with nuclear, whether it be safety or whatever those concerns are. We don't have to accept old generation nuclear.
Well,
and by the way, Utah does want it in our backyard. We're one of the few UAMPs here, a municipality, a conglomerate of municipalities is one of the few that have actually made it partway through the permitting process for a small nuclear reactor. And PacifiCorp, our major utility here, is working with Warren Buffett to bring nuclear.
And there's $6 billion in this bipartisan infrastructure bill that would go to some of those small nuclear reactors. There's $9.5 billion to research clean hydrogen and create offices to manage it. You got to like those provisions, even though you're voting down the bill.
Well, the fact that you could, a blind squirrel could find a nut in a forest, right? That's what it's like looking through this bill, trying to find something that you like in it. $6 billion out of trillions and trillions of dollars isn't really a serious effort to explore things that really are fundamental if we're going to get to a green future.
So what is the Republican path to a green future? Specifically, what are the proposals you want to hear?
Well, let me say, first of all, if we follow the Republican path, we don't need to kill U.S. jobs. We don't need to export our jobs overseas and subject ourselves to our enemies. We have ideas that improve the U.S. economy, that rely on U.S. technology and U.S. innovation, such as new nuclear, as we mentioned, hydrogen. And listen, fossil fuels have got to be part of the conversation. We've reduced more greenhouse gas emissions here in the United States with fossil fuels than the entire Green New Deal could have ever dreamed of doing. And it's a mistake to demonize fossil fuels. They're actually part of our answer.
Well, part of what I hear frequently is, okay, make these adaptations, don't eliminate. But the challenge is, how do you meet the moment in terms of urgency when you are trying to put in investments that take a decade or more to get there? So how do you do both things at once?
Well, you have to do both things at once. And let's be honest, when we set unrealistic
goals. But how do you make the market more efficient if not for creating tax credits and doing things that have government subsidies? How do you move it faster?
Listen, our free marketplace is remarkable. It's U.S. innovation and technology that's led to the vast reductions in carbon that we already have. And I have full confidence in this marketplace. Now, that's not to say that as a government we don't have a role, that we shouldn't be looking for those areas to incentivize and help and poke and prod along the way. But we need all hands on deck, and we need to talk about this in a bipartisan way and not just the extreme ideas, which, by the way, have led us in a terrible direction. We're looking at an energy crisis this winter. Rates are skyrocketing, impacting those who can least afford to pay for it. If we're not careful, we're on the path of Germany. That doesn't look good.
Congressman, have a safe trip. We'll leave it there, and Face the Nation will be back. Vice President Kamala Harris got a third dose of the COVID-19 shot over the weekend and urged Americans to get their booster shot when they become eligible. Harris reminded Americans the shots are free, safe, and will save lives. In just a few days, a children's version of the Pfizer COVID vaccine is expected to be made available to 28 million children between the ages of 5 to 11 years old. CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman is in Cocoa Beach, Florida, with a look at how parents across the country are reacting.
There you go. You're welcome.
Halloween 2021's real scare? The next dogfight in COVID America's divide. As soon as Tuesday, the CDC could join the FDA approving the Pfizer vaccine for young children, ages 5 to 11.
We have been waiting for this. Parents have been waiting for this. Schools have been waiting for this. And this is really a breakthrough.
Smaller arms, smaller doses. Pfizer's pediatric vaccine has 2 shots, each 1/3 its regular dose. Clinical trials showed efficacy rates above 90%. There are enough doses to vaccinate 28 million eligible children. In the latest weekly COVID update, 1 in 4 new cases were children. Vaccinating young kids could help keep them in class, protecting them, their families, and their friends.
We will be ready immediately following FDA and CDC's decisions so that parents can get their kids vaccinated quickly, easily, and conveniently.
But amicably? Fat chance. Millions of parents already burn with a resentment fever. In one survey, less than 1 in 3 parents say they'll get the COVID vaccine for young kids right away. Another third said they'll wait
to tackle the fact that the planet is getting hotter. But expectations for substantive agreements to do something about it are pretty low. The UN Secretary General says there's serious risk that world leaders will not deliver, urging more ambition and further action. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Mark Phillips is there.
There is a cloud of gloom hanging over this conference in Glasgow, and it's not just the weather. To understand the pessimism, it helps to go back to those heady, optimistic days in France 6 years ago when the Paris Climate Accords were signed. The warming of the planet would be kept below 2 degrees Celsius, it was agreed. Preferably, it wouldn't exceed 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The problem with Paris, though, was that it was a conference about aspiration, not practicalities. How each country would reduce its own greenhouse gases was left.
20% of the city's fire stations could go dark. That is how dug in they are. But compared to telling many parents they have to vaccinate their kids, child's play.
That's Mark Strassman in Florida. We're joined now by Dr. Claire Boogaard, a pediatrician who also oversees the COVID vaccine program at Children's National Hospital here in Washington, D.C. Good morning to you, doctor.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So your hospital participated in this trial of the Pfizer vaccine for children. You saw what happened. Did you have any concerns?
No, I think this is all really good news. What the independent advisory panel and the FDA looked at last week was really good science. They didn't skip any steps in this process. And the best news, both professionally, as someone who wants to take care of my patients, but also as a mom of a 6-year-old, is that this is awesome. There are no serious side effects given this lower dose of the vaccine to this lower group of kids, and it still protects kids from getting the infection.
So this type of technology, the mRNA vaccine, you don't have any misgivings about giving it to someone who's young and developing?
No, not at all. Vaccines, all they do is they give your body a chance to build a response to something that's non-harmful so it can protect you against something that is harmful. And everything is risk-benefit. If there was no coronavirus in the country, we wouldn't be talking about a vaccine, right? But instead, there's this life-threatening disease floating around our communities, and in order to protect us, this is the safest, most effective way to do so.
So the panel that you mentioned that voted on this said the benefits outweigh the risks of myocarditis. That's a heart condition. Did your hospital see any of that? How concerned should parents be about impacts on the heart of their child?
Yeah, the hospital's research is still part of the research that Pfizer reviewed last week. And again, there was no serious medical conditions or serious adverse reactions from this vaccine in that group, including myocarditis. The FDA knew this was a concern, and at the end of the summer, they asked Pfizer to increase the amount of patients in the study, and they've done so. And honestly, it's really good news. It's very safe.
So one of the questions raised was whether every child needs it. Versus if they had COVID in the past or if there are conditions. If you're a parent at home, how should you weigh these things?
It's a good question. I talk about this all the time with my husband, with my family, and with our patients, right? Everything is risk-benefit. So you need to think about your own individual family situation. You also need to think about the community around you. For us as parents, we don't want anything bad to happen to our kids, right? COVID has bad complications with children. Doesn't have it with all children, but has many. And it also has the complications in this young group of having long-term issues, whether it's having symptoms that last longer than 2 months, which is the long COVID that people talk about, or developing a very serious life-threatening condition called multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children.
That's the rash.
Yeah, it's where your body is inflamed in a very serious way, and it can be life-threatening, requires critical care in some kids. That, to me as a parent, is enough for me to say, you know what, I don't want my kid to get a booger. I don't want my kid to get that. And if I have a choice, I'd rather use this super safe vaccine to get them back into school and back to their normal life.
So kids who are younger than 5 years old, my children, toddlers, infants, they're still going to have to wait. Pfizer said well into 2022 before they get vaccinated. So what's your best advice to the parents of the very young?
Just stay vigilant. I'm with you too. I have a 4-year-old, so I hear you loud and clear. But be optimistic. They are also lowering the dose for that group too. Keep in mind, this Pfizer vaccine has now been given to millions of people. We're just now offering it at a lower dose to a younger population who has a strong immune system. So I'm optimistic that the research will still look really positive in the young kids. And I also know that scientists take this very seriously. They do not want to offer something that's going to harm people. Myself as a doctor, I don't want to go out advocating for something that I don't think is safe. So I promise hope is coming. We're almost at the end of this. But for those who are unvaccinated, you are still at risk for getting the virus itself. So keep with the social distancing, masking, and follow the public health guidelines in your area.
The CDC director continues to say she's so concerned that only 1/3 of pregnant women are vaccinated. If you were vaccinated while pregnant, what do you tell your patients about their children that they bring into you? Are those kids protected?
Good question. We anticipate that if someone was infected during pregnancy or given the vaccine, that there is a chance that they have some protection with the antibodies that mom made that are shared to the child. There's also a protection if you're breastfeeding. What we don't know is how protected that child is. So what we don't want you to do is assume, since you had it as a pregnant lady or a breastfeeding woman, that your child is protected, because we can't guarantee that. But it's all something we recommend.
Doctor, thank you for your advice.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us in studio. We'll be back in a moment. This Tuesday is Election Day in Virginia and New Jersey, where voters will select their governors. Usually the party out of the White House has an advantage in these off-year races, but the one in Virginia is drawing some national attention right now as a test of just how Democrats are governing. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is here to help us break it down. So Ed, we don't normally cover governor's races, but this one has taken on outside importance in the political world. Why is this mid-sized southern state so important?
In essence, it sets the table for next year. This is a state that's been hewing Democratic for the last 10 years or so. But for whatever reason, they're having a competitive statewide contest this year. They shouldn't be doing that if electoral history from recent years holds. But it seems to be for a few different reasons. One, you have a popular, apparently well-liked Republican contender who has managed to make this about something other than Donald Trump. A local issue of concern, education, and specifically parental control of education, all stemming from a debate answer that his Democratic opponent, the former trying to be future governor Terry McAuliffe, made in a debate recently where he said, I don't think parents should have control of what goes on in the classroom. In essence, trying to explain away a bill he had vetoed years ago. But the Youngkin campaign seized on this and said, what do you mean you don't want parents to be in charge after years of mass mandates and virtual schooling and all these debates about social policy and about what's being taught in school? So it could signal that local issue, finding one, plus the growing unpopularity of the president, could be enough for certain Republicans in states where maybe they haven't done as well recently to pull it off. And it'll signal to the rest of the party, this is how you can win in the post-Trump era.
Those emotional issues,
Absolutely.
always good to galvanize people. One of the things, though, that I think is interesting is to see current and former presidents out there campaigning in Virginia. And President Biden went out and helped Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic candidate, even though McAuliffe said basically that Biden's creating problems for him, headwinds, and that he's unpopular.
Right. I mean, and Biden won the state by 10 points last year, but his numbers sit now in the 40s. But to bring him over to Virginia to say that his opponent is a Trump acolyte and could return the state to Trump-style politics, or what's going on down in Texas regarding its abortion policy. In essence, what Democrats are trying to do is continue what worked for them over the last 4 years, nationalize the race and warn them about what Trump-style republicanism could mean for their state. Meanwhile, Youngkin's trying to go local, focusing on that issue of education, insisting that he will not, has not campaigned with the former president, even though he's doing a telephone town hall for him Monday night. Youngkin says he won't be there. Trying to divert attention and say, I'm focused on these things here in the state. We'll do this on my own.
What's interesting there for Democrats, though, is that they're not making an affirmative argument of here's what you get when we govern. They're saying that's what you might get if we're not governing.
Well, that's what frustrates McAuliffe so much. I mean, he told me as much. He said the lack of action in Washington doesn't help me make the case that government can do things for people. So if they would only just pass this legislation they've been spending months on, it would help me make the point.
Do you buy that argument?
In Virginia, I do, because of the unique nature of Virginia and the fact that it relies so much on the federal government for employment and for its economic growth. It works there. It wouldn't necessarily work in other states. And the other thing that I've noticed in recent weeks especially is McAuliffe has made the abortion argument, that if they did what they did in Texas and if the Supreme Court rules a certain way, it could happen here. They insist that abortion rights is a big issue of concern for voters in Virginia, and we'll see whether it works on Tuesday.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you for the preview. And all of you can watch Ed and our political team on Tuesday evening on our digital network, CBSN. They will be broadcasting the election results. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Have a happy and safe Halloween. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.